Engineers of Reddit, what's something that's designed into a machine, solely because of the stupidity of human beings? I used to work in a building where the air ducts and air diffusers were originally designed to be almost completely silent. Well, apparently when the building opened, a lot of tenants complained that the air wasn't working. While it was working fine, they couldn't hear it and assumed it wasn't running. The building ended up putting these sound boxes in the ceiling near every diffuser to simulate the sound of air blowing. Could have saved money by just tying some ribbon or something to the vents. Get this man a job. Putting barriers at railroad crossings that block the whole road and not just the directional lane, because even with lights flashing and barriers down, people still think they can drive around the gates and beat the train. I've been on scene for some pretty nasty cleanups because people didn't want to wait an extra 5 minutes for a train to pass. People still think they can drive around the gates and beat the train. I could have made it if you hadn't made me slow down to get around these barriers. My sister is a paramedic. She once got to a black fried train station worker. Because they were too lazy to go down and the long way to their rest place when having lunch, they instead used to use some ladder to just go over a train. Well, one day there was too much air humidity and thus the high voltage cable above the train decided, let's shoot a lightning 1 meter into that guy. She said the guy was most likely instantly dead and wasn't even really discernible to be human anymore. In one of my electrical safety classes we were shown a video of someone in India, I think. This guy was goofing around and climbed up on top of a stationary train to show off. Well, he gets up there and just nonchalantly reaches up and grabs a cable that was running above the train. The high voltage cable that powers the train. Instant death. His whole body catches fire. His charred corpse finally lets go of the cable after a little while and he falls from the train. Electricity ain't no joke. In middle school we were shown a similar video, but of a bear climbing a power line. Right after it was a close-up of a thoroughly cooked bear head with an underground power cable clamped in its jaw. I'd say they drove the "don't fuck with our electrical infrastructure" point home pretty strongly. Edit, found the picture of the second bear, somewhat NSFW. Big deal, I'm not gonna bite the power lines. The reason an ATM gives you your card back before your cash is because you'd just grab the cash and forget your card. Silly humans. I was in a foreign country where the ATM gave you your cash before your card, and walked away without my debit card. In my defense, I had been drinking a bit that night. But apparently if you leave your card in the machine it will get sucked in and stored internally. Thankfully I was able to get it back when the bank opened the next day. But yeah, people like me are the reason for that. Same thing happened to my uncle, but the card was shredded and he was sober. Half of mechanical engineering design is trying to figure out how the end users are going to misuse a mechanism and either hurt themselves or break something. I seriously can't think of any mechanism that doesn't have some kind of anti-idiot thought put into it. I had a professor in one of my classes say, if it can possibly be used as a hammer, someone somehow will use it as one. This is why so many things are so bulky and reinforced past what the normal accidental dropping/use factor of safety is. Saw a student use a micrometer as a clamp one time. To be fair, many websites and video games do this. It's part of the user experience. It would be somewhat disconcerting if every action taken resulted in immediate changes on the screen, especially in video games. Humans usually prefer some sort of transition that takes a finite amount of time and indicates their input has been acknowledged and processed, like an animation, loading bar/circle, %loaded, etc. Games especially do this when saving. There was a story about a PlayStation game that didn't bother to show any indication because saving only took a quarter second, but Sony insisted they add a little animation and delay to reassure the player it actually saved. This probably happens with tons of games, but the story was about a PlayStation game in particular. If you work in an office, chances are you have an IP desk phone, the ones that use a network cable. Now if you pick it up you will hear a dial tone or some other white noise. That's completely artificial, it's just an audio file the phone goes out of its way to play for you. Why? Normally the phones are silent, but the first company that popularized then, I think it was Cisco, kept getting complaints that the phones were broken because there was no dial tone. So they just slapped some white noise on the phones, and people stopped complaining. Similar to this, originally box cake mix at the grocery store only needed water added to it and nothing else. People wouldn't buy it because it didn't feel like they were actually making a cake. So they decided to make it so the consumer had to add an egg and some oil. It goes deeper than that. Ever wonder why the vast majority of mixed package requires 3 ingredients? And why is it always water, eggs, and oil? Well, it turns out humans are obsessed with the number 3. Studies show that the 3 ingredients are the right mix of convenience and homemade feel. As for water, eggs, and oil, they are found to be the most likely ingredients you already have at your house. 3 shalt be the number thou shalt count, and the number of the counting shall be 3. 4 shalt thou not count, nor either count thou 2, excepting that thou then proceed to 3. 5 is right out. I run Polar 137 EMC monitors, an AutoCut 115, and a couple of other PMC strip cutters. IIRC, the old Polars we run and possibly the newer 115 have what is called one-hand operation. I'll have to check the manual. Besides the possibility of the one-hand setting, there is the auto knife. Turn that on and your program will run auto after making first cut manually. Depressing the grip pedal between auto cuts or breaking the beam will stop the machine. Guillotines are nothing to become complacent around. I work, ed, with several people missing fingertips from cutters or die punches. Edit, the auto cut feature can also be set to run on the first cut as well, such as after an air smash. Cut several logs in half early on while learning because of a missing DMK. Edit 2, if you get bit by a guillotine, whatever gets caught is not going to be reattached depending on grip pressure, 300 to 4,500 pounds of force. The grip will crush/powder bone and then the knife will cleanly cut the crushed portion off. Story time, kids. When I was 18, I was operating a large roll forming machine and had my gloved hand pulled into said machine. I was feeding metal into the machine and my glove caught on the metal. The controls for the machine were on the left end, which as I discovered was in just the right place for me to slam my body into the control box, hitting the large red, protruding more than any other thing on the box, button. The machine stopped before reaching my elbow. This simple design feature saved, I believe, my arm. As it is, I have all my fingers, and full strength and mobility. Only some rather large scars remain as a testament to the event. I think it's not just due to stupidity, but once you operate such machine for several years, the chance of making mistake adds up. People make mistakes, trip, have hangover, get accidentally too close, etc. Not an engineer but a millwright and work around industrial equipment daily. Most e-stops on large machines won't save you, they're so large and asking them to stop on a dime ain't gonna happen. About the dumbest guard I've ever had to make is on a roll stamp machine. It's more or less a hydraulic press that puts part numbers in round objects via pressure. You put the part in, line it up and have to hit 2 buttons a few feet apart, and that's a safety on its own. We had a guy who would kinda toss one of the parts in the holder and hope it was in the right spot when he hit the button. If it wasn't, the machine wouldn't work. Dude must have got tires of having to move the part around in figures. I could save time and bump the part with my nose rather than use my hands. He did, apparently for a year or so. One day he hits the buttons with his nose on the part, the press comes down and gets the tip of his nose. He freaks out and lets go of the buttons, and that stopped the machine with him stuck in it. One of the joys of maintenance is you gotta be the guy to get the other guy out of the machine, and because of that a ton of first responder training is necessary for the job. I give him the once over, make sure he didn't get his head or neck pulled in, and cut up an oxygen mask and more or less taped it to his mouth so he could get air while someone calls the fire department. The FD shows up and asks if I can get him out because I know my way around the machines, and I go get my toolbox. Unfortunately, the bolts I needed access to were blocked by his body, and the jaws of life won't touch hardened steel, so our options were limited. The press is on a ratchet system so it doesn't throw a part of a hydraulic line blows, and luckily for the guy stuck, the ratchet was just on a new tooth, meaning it had to go down further to be released. I inform the fire department it will have to move another 1/4 inch down so the press head would go back up. We finally say it, he ain't gonna die so we'll just run it down and get it over with. The paramedics load him up with Dilaudid and we try to go down, only to find that dumbass who is stuck kicked the wiring for the hydraulic valve and broke it. I had to splice some wiring right at his dick level, and he's an incredibly obese Iowan, so the smells were interesting. I fix the wiring and drop the press down, it releases and he pops up looking like Rudolph the obese Iowan. Once he came back to work, I made his ass repeat what he did on a locked out machine so I could make guarding for it, and was impressed by his stupidity. I painted it his favorite color. He still works there and is as dumb as a pancake, but he has heart, lol. Nice guy, just eats paint chips.